Mr. Chair, if I might.
Mr. Bloom, yes.
This is a highly technical area, and that is, I think, fundamentally what the issue is with trying to come up with some kind of a definition at this point in time and why it's going to take time. Dr. Criddle, who is one of the foremost experts in this area, was in opposition to my bill until he read the very language that we're talking about that the industry is asking the committee to amend into the bill now. And in his letter that you have of June 16th, if I might read the language, he says, the proposed industry amendment creates even greater obstacles for development of truly sustainable and renewable materials. This is a Stanford scientist who is widely considered to be one of the foremost experts in this field. And I think Mr. Wilson can add some comments on this topic, if he might.
Mr. Chairman, members, discussing PHAs, which the gentleman from Micropowders is discussing, polyhydroxic alkanoids, of which if we think of PHAs as a genus and PHBs and PHVs as a species, these are promising biopolymers for sure, without a doubt. The problem is the existing OECD standard within the methodology itself says that these should not, that the methodology should not be applied to the natural environment within the standard itself. Our issue is that the standards that are proposed by industry, we don't think cover all the questions we have about this new material. So whatever it's made of is what it's going to biodegrade into. In the case of his product, it's going to be CO2 and water, most likely. I don't know the exact formulation. In the case of Mango Materials, it's going to be water and methane, because they're using waste methane as their feedstock. So this is a naturally occurring biopolymer. The problem is we have no statutory precedent on how to deal with it. Right now, in California law, you can't throw a banana peel out the window, even though it biodegrades and it's organic material. That's littering. And so what we're doing is making sure that we have to get this policy right, because it's going to have national and international precedent, whatever we do here. And so we have questions about not necessarily the toxicity of these biopolymers, but what is the nutrient load? The gentleman himself said this is food to a fish. It's true. It also has a prebiotic effect, which means it changes the gut flora of the animal that consumes it, and it changes their immune system capacity. What happens if 50 container ships of this stuff spill over in a given environment? Our issue is not with the innovation of this material. It's part of, in my view, part of the suite of solutions to plastic pollution. The questions that I have about it is, what does it do at exposure to an environment? And there are no peer-reviewed papers to say, if you dump a bunch of PHA in San Francisco Bay, what is that going to do to the fish populations there? Those studies do not exist. And so I guess my issue is we need to make sure if we're going to create a pathway for what I consider a promising technology, it has to be much more narrowly defined than what industry has offered. And frankly, it cannot be mixed with other persistent additives. In the example that Assemblymember Bloom showed of the Neutrogena product, you notice those microbeads were blue. What goes into that dye? What goes into copolymerizing? Because you can make PHA into something bad. Maybe this product is not, but what guidelines are we going to put around what PHA is actually going to be as a biopolymer? Because you can mix anything with it, make it persist and toxic.
And let me ask Mr. Bloom, and then I'll get to you, because when we talk about these copolymerizers, we don't want to. I mean, part of this is the toxicity or the nutrient overload or these other factors that may have an effect if we don't have the information. I mean, we're worried also about the toxicity of these plastics.
Exactly. And
But if we don't know what they are, I mean, there's a question of
we don't. We don't know that. This is the kind of issue for which we have a regulatory process, which can stretch out over a very long period of time to determine the safety of various products. And, so we can, I would like to accelerate that process and try to bring back a bill that gives some definition to this category. But to do it in the context of this bill, we received this language within the last, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. Is that about right? 3 weeks ago. And you can see the conversation that has ensued since. Most of what you're hearing around the table has developed around this language that we got 3 weeks ago. And you can see how technical and how difficult it is to come to terms with it. One thing is for sure, the language that's proposed does not work. Will we continue to have a conversation with Ms. Kepke and opponents? Absolutely. I simply doubt that we can bring that to fruition before, hopefully, this makes it through a committee today and hits the Senate floor. We are now a year away from when this bill was first brought. The bill is essentially the same bill now as it was then. It failed for lack of a vote, and I understand that dynamic, but in that 1 year period of time, billions of microbeads have now entered the waste stream and are out persisting in the ocean. So the first responsibility that we have is to stop that flow. That's the way I see it. And you have my commitment that I will continue to work now. And, if we can come to agreement on language before the bill hits the floor, we'll amend it. But we need to move forward with this bill now to stop the flow of the microbeads into our water.
It's the second time I've heard that commitment. Okay, we got it. Mr. Zarnacki.
Yeah, just to the comment about that these, as I describe them, as food for the environment. If the bill passes as it's written and natural materials are allowed, almost all these natural materials are also biodegradable and are also food for the environment. And I wonder if there's been any studies done on what replacing all these non-reactive polyethylene beads with walnut shells that now the fish are eating, the microbes are eating, and what happens to the bellies of the fish and these kinds of things. It's the same effect. So to say that ours has to have extra study, but we can shift that entire load to walnut shells and other natural cellulose materials. They are also food, so they also will have an impact on those things that were brought up by the gentleman.
Fair point. My doctor keeps telling me to eat more oatmeal. So, Ms. Kopke.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just with regard to the toxic effect and potential for adding toxic chemicals to these alternatives, one thing to be mindful of that these companies are watching very carefully what their chemists and engineers are looking at adding, largely because we have Prop 65 as well as the candidate chemical list with the Safer Consumer Products Green Chemistry Program that ultimately could trigger additional regulatory requirements associated with that. So it is our understanding that that will not be a problem because those would then trigger additional labeling and other requirements. So they're very mindful of what they are adding to any particular product in the context of those particular lists of chemicals. And I would also just add that with regard to, kind of getting to middle ground and perhaps California would like to see kind of additional testing criteria and what have you for these types of alternatives that we appreciate that the proponents, are looking favorably upon. Perhaps in terms of expediting, the discussion to start with the OECD guidelines and what can we add maybe in addition to that would make the state of California feel comfortable. So we're not starting from ground zero, but we have some basis for which we can have that conversation, expedite that for the purposes of this particular bill. Further, if there are concerns about, the impact of that broader than this particular application, there are ways to structure the language so that it only applies in this particular case. And lastly, I would just add that, again, we are open to this, but the inability to come to that agreement and define, positively define that those may be allowable alternatives will ultimately take those innovative opportunities and ultimately hinder their ability to be used. Cleanup legislation even that would even pass a year and a half from now may be too late for some of the companies that have already agreed to dates that are far before 2020 of phasing out. And so they're going to have to look elsewhere, and those options are not going to be on the table for them as they move to reformulate faster and to, the Assemblyman, the author's comments about trying to avoid additional microbeads, going into waterways and having that impact. The companies are not waiting till the final date of this bill to start making that headway. They're already reformulating products now. And so taking those options off the table, for one, are going to hurt those small businesses here in California that are working on those alternatives. But not only that, it's taking options off the table that the proponents even feel, are very favorable and could be very good options. So with that, I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chair and members.
Mr. Chair, if I could make one brief point.
Because I can't have all the fun with the questions. I have other senators that want to have questions.
Well, with the chair's indulgence, at the industry's request, we amended this bill last year to have an implementation date of 2020.
That's my
rush,
point.
We would have preferred a date much sooner.
4 years.
But we amended the bill, and therefore there actually is a lot of time before the industry has to make this transition. I just simply don't understand the necessity to rush this idea that may have a great deal of validity, that we need to agree on a new set of terms for formulation. That's why I don't wear a
I saw
watch.
your hand go up. Do you have something on this item, Horace?
Yeah, just very briefly, the comment about some of these particles are colored, and they are colored with food-grade colorants, just like the kind of colorants you find in Jell-O gelatin. So there's no additional hazards. There's no secret nasty things that are in there. It's the biomaterial, and if it's a colored one, it's got a food-grade colorant in it, and those are already in the system from food products. Thank you.
Let's go to Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'm going back to what's in Assemblymember Bloom. This is a great bill. I supported it last year. The purpose of it is to eliminate those billions of microbeads that are getting into our water. That's what I think this bill should be focusing on, is what we're eliminating, not what we need. We're not looking for a pathway for the future. We're looking at what is causing the problem that we're faced with today. If it's a microbead that is 5 millimeters or less in every dimension, and that does not degrade or compost or whatever it does, I think that's what we're looking for. And I think we should define it as that. Not look to the future, but let's see what exactly it is we're trying to eliminate. And that's what this bill should do, not look at the pathway.
Isn't that part of the amendment?
Well, that's part of the amendment, but I like the amendment of adding, if that is appropriate, the does not degrade or biodegrade as the, or does not get into whatever the natural environment, whatever the wording was. If that's appropriate, then that would work. That remains solid. If that's something that we want to eliminate, then that would be appropriate to me in the natural environment. I guess that's, I don't think we should look for the future in a pathway.
Let's go to Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As always, fascinating discussion. And I do appreciate the earnest efforts on behalf of the industry to express the concerns of your members. And I just want to suggest, taking off or following up with Senator Hill's comments, that this bill is very specific and it's focused. We've identified a problem, and this bill very graciously, I'm surprised to be reminded that the implementation date is 2020. It is 4.5 years away. So we need to proceed cautiously, especially at this time of severe drought, as to what further impacts we are placing on our water and our water systems. And there was a comment made during public comment that this can potentially, the status quo, impact our ability to recycle water for drinkable purposes. And so this has even broader implications than the traditional presentation of this bill. So with this very generous implementation date of 2020, I just wanted to ask the question that with this bill passed and implemented as law, under current law that this will join, should the industry come forward with something that is compliant with this bill as law, what is the process for it to enter into the marketplace as an alternative that, again, is compliant with the wording in this bill?
I believe we need to create a process.
So that would come subsequent to the passage of this, and we've got 4.5 years.
And I've committed to working on that process.
Okay, so that process needs to come together, and
Mr. Wilson is already trying to think that through. Dr. Criddle at Stanford is worried that the language proposed is going to be a bar to doing the kind of thing that he believes we can do.
Right, and I would
that
agree
will
with
be
you.
environmentally superior.
We don't need additional bars or hurdles, but I would suggest.
California could become the leader in this technology. We actually can be the place from which it emanates and really take a leadership role once again on a very important environmental initiative that will allow people to, have these kinds of products in a variety of different forms. It really could be a boon, should be a boon to the industry.
So
I apologize.
to pass the bill as it is written will be the appropriate incentive for whatever may come. We don't need to in any way dilute that. 4.5 years, a lot can get done within that time period, both on the part of further development within the industry and also your committed statements to defining the process by which industry will be bringing to us as alternatives compliant with this bill as law. So I'm happy to move the bill.
Thank you.
Whichever state is the leader in exfoliants is better beware. Senator Bates.
Yes, Assemblymember Bloom, you have committed to providing or being concerned and supportive of the industry finding a pathway. It just doesn't seem to me that the bill as it's currently presented with only 4 years, that's a pathway if we're talking about R&D to the level that you are requiring to ensure that when it does biodegrade, these polymers that might be the answer can be tested. And I guess my question will go to the opposition. Tell me how much time your industry needs to have certainty that with the bill passed, they're going to be able to address that and not take these products off the shelf and, kill innovation and basically move those products out of the state so you have to go across the border to buy Neutrogena's, exfoliant, because if other states don't prohibit them, that is another unintended, perhaps, consequence, but it will be there. Because I mean, we've all been involved with the technology advances, and we've been very involved in the advances in the world of biology. It doesn't happen quickly, it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without a lot of money invested. Why is a company going to make that kind of investment when there's no certainty that there's going to be in this House some sort of rethinking on the manner in which they're implementing this immediately? And 2020 in the world of science is pretty immediate when you have to look at the time in R&D.
When we hear from the author first and then Ms. Kupke.
I guess I'm saying you're not providing a pathway. You're providing a hill to climb, and it has so many potholes, pitfalls along the way. I just think that they say, okay, maybe some can make it, but many won't, so they're just going to eliminate those products. And the innovation that we're looking for that they've suggested here could actually answer the question and actually move California forward for the rest of the states in having a product that really meets all of the concerns that we have regarding toxicity in our water and in our ocean.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes,
Pathway or
I
Hill,
think
which
as
is it?
Senator Leno observed, the bill really provides the impetus for accelerating the process, and that process is already underway. I think our witness from Micropowders has indicated that they think that they've got this worked out, and that may well be the case, but we have to have a process in place for evaluating that from the state of California's perspective. Dr. Criddle at Stanford also believes that he has to put it in the vernacular, the secret here, the solution that will help carry us forward. So I don't think that we are years ahead where this innovation might need that kind of lead time. I think we're on the verge of innovation. We need to stop putting this product into the waste stream. That will incentivize an even more accelerated process. And I don't want to say it a fourth time, but I'll work on it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Senator, with regard to your question, the companies, again, are already working on reformulations now. As was noted in the analysis, a number of those companies have committed to dates far in advance of 2020. The 2020 date, as I understand it, was really speaking to some of the smaller manufacturers, as well as with regard to some of the over-the-counter products with active ingredients that have to go through an FDA process because of those active ingredients. That was an out-year timeline to look at some of those a very smaller subset of products that might need additional time to work on that innovation. But as you heard from Micropowders, the technology is commercially available now. But given those timelines, as was noted in the analysis, those timelines for a couple of those companies is by the end of this year. And so absent the ability for them to know that using those new alternatives is okay per the bill and would deem them still in compliance with the law as passed, they're going to have to look elsewhere or just consider pulling products off the shelves in order to meet that expedited timeline, which they want to do. I mean, they're looking to these new technologies to use now.
Vice Chair, go. Ms. Bates, please. Senator Bates, you have a follow-up.
So what do they do without the amendments you've proposed that would allow this specific alternative?
We have to go back to the drawing board, but those new alternatives that they're looking at would not be an option at this point. The bill's not clear that they're compliant alternatives.
So do they stop their research or their production on those at this point in time?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go back to the companies and member companies and ask that.
I know Mr. Wilson has been chomping at the bit to add a comment, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wilson and Mr. Zarnacki, I know you guys normally don't appear here. This is a rather free-for-all committee hearing. It's an exception, so I keep ping-ponging and everybody gets in, but please, Mr. Miller, you have something to add.
Before Mr. Wilson speaks, I just wanted to add one thing that a reminder to the committee that I think might be helpful, and it's another amendment that we took. Some of these microbeads are contained in prescription products at the industry's request. Last year, we took an amendment that exempts any prescription medicine or product from the microbead ban.
Thank you for reminding us. Mr. Miller.
I just want to underscore that the motivation for the companies to reformulate quicker than what the law would require them to do is because they are losing a tremendous amount of business, because in the public space, in the public discourse, people are unhappy about washing their face with plastic and brushing their teeth with plastic. So they are quickly trying to reformulate. Industry gave us guidelines for reformulation last session on AB 1699 that said 2 years. And we said, well, why are you asking for 4 years? They never answered the question. And to be very fair to the proponents of this bill, we literally had no idea what ingredient they were looking to reformulate to till 3 weeks ago. And it was not from them disclosing that. It was from a meeting while I was negotiating the federal legislation in Representative Frank Pallone's office in D.C., where his staffer said, "What about PHBV?" Knew nothing about PHBV at all. I have been studying all these other materials because I've been literally trying to figure out what are they going to use. When I have the discussion with Johnson & Johnson, contrary to what Ms. Kupke says, he did not disclose the ingredient to me either at that time, but I figured it out by the way he was discussing it. In that conversation as well, he also said that microbeads don't escape wastewater treatment and that he was going to provide me with a study that demonstrated that. He provided me with a study that was not peer-reviewed. It was a PowerPoint presentation from Temple University that didn't even demonstrate what he said it did. I had 3 other scientists look at it, and so this is not a proactive engagement of proponents on this bill. So to characterize it as such, or that we are being a barrier to innovation, is simply inaccurate. We've had to figure out on our own what they are doing. And so these technologies, though promising, are only going to scale because of microbeads. Their feedstock is way too expensive. They are not price competitive in the market. Most of the companies in the PHA game have been on the brink of bankruptcy for years. So this is a chance, well, it's certainly true of metabolics. And
I think, okay, hold. I still believe that the law requires some consumer disclosure of ingredients that we have, or does not. Vice Chair Gaines.
Yeah, I'd like to get to the issue, if I could, Ms. Kepke, in terms of the smaller companies that have to go through an FDA approval process, and what is that timeline, given that this would be effective, I think, 2020?
Absolutely. So just point of clarification, absolutely correct that prescription drugs have been exempted. However, there are over-the-counter products that have active ingredients that were not exempted as part of those amendments. As far as that timeline, I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head, but I can certainly follow up with you and with the rest of the committee with more information on that.
Okay. So
But as I understand it, that was the genesis for that timeline.
If I might, I don't think we have an issue with the small companies. They were largely represented by the Personal Care Products Association. They've moved to a non-opposed position, the association has. What remains are Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson. That's who we've heard from. We have not heard from small companies that are opposed to this bill.
Okay.
another question, if I could.
Go ahead.
In terms of the matrix, it's my understanding, and clarify, that there doesn't seem to be a matrix in place for a replacement, right? That if this bill moves forward without the amendments, there'll simply be a ban, and then the industry is going to have to figure out how to react, which in my view is not a good process. I mean, why wouldn't we go through a process that would provide a pathway for the industry that would have some clarity in terms of where they could go with alternative ingredients, so that there wouldn't be a disruption within the marketplace? And I just don't understand that.
We will go through a process. I doubt that there will be any disruption at all. There are natural alternatives that are currently in use, and there's no reason why we can't come to agreement on a matrix. But once again, we need to have certainty that the flow of plastic into the waste stream is going to end.
Okay, and would there be...
And that will help propel arriving in an agreement on the matrix. There's no question about that.
But shouldn't that be included in your legislation?
No, I think
That
it's a topic for a separate bill. If we could find that answer within the limited time that we have in the legislative session, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it. And that's why I've agreed to continue to work on it and have those conversations. But I want to point out that these conversations have been going on now for about 2 years, and it is only within the last 3 weeks, as Mr. Wilson and I have observed, that we have an inkling of what the products might look like, and that helps us determine what the process for approval of a new product might look like. We're not opposed to coming up with a pathway. In fact, we think it's a great idea to have that pathway. But as I think everyone in this room knows, not just on the dais, those kinds of solutions take a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion, and a lot of time to work out. I'm committed to doing that. Mike, staff has, is probably not happy with hearing some of what I'm saying right now, because it takes an enormous amount of their bandwidth. We've put a huge amount of energy into this bill, and it's not been around the discussion of plastic microbeads and banning them. Even the industry is agreeing, if I'm hearing them correctly, plastic has to go.
Yes.
So, that part of what we're talking about here should move forward. It should move forward expeditiously. It's not going to be enacted until, or it's not going to take place until 2020. That's a long time.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate
Okay.
your comments to the degree you've stated that you will work with the industry.
5 times.
I would appreciate that. I'm going to lay off the bill. I'd like to see what the final product looks like when it arrives on the Senate floor. I think it goes to Judiciary next. So, thank you.
So I'm going to close the debate on this. Now, I realize that there was a motion by Senator Leno, who has left the room. So I believe our rules require the motion to be made by somebody in. Thank you, Senator Pavley.
The bill 2020, the banning this product makes sense now
Right.
in light of the proponents' testimony here, water districts, et cetera. But having that relatively generous time frame of 2020, these people will work on it right away. You need to ban the product then. It's a lot of environmental regulations, especially the tougher ones. It's amazing what the private sector can do if they know they're going to have to make some adjustments.
So the motion is the bill as in print.
Correct.
All right.
Thank
You're the author, Assemblymember Bloom. Is there anything else that you want to add?
I don't think there's anything more that you want to hear, Mr. Chair.
We could
So,
get that, your promise for the sixth time that
I
you'll
will
work
be
with the
merciful and
opposition.
simply ask for your aye vote.
Please call the roll.
Item 9, AB 888, by Assemblymember Bloom. The motion do pass to Committee on Judiciary. Senators Wykowski?
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. Gaines? Bates? No. Bates, no. Hill? Aye. Hill, aye. Jackson? Aye. Jackson, aye. Leno? Pavley? Aye. Pavley, aye. 4-1.
Okay, we'll keep that matter open. Thank you. All the matters that have been on the calendar. I'm going to open a roll on the other matters, starting with the consent calendar. Sorry about,
Let me find it.
well,
6. Yeah.
Madam Assistant. Gaines. Ted.
Okay.
You
Want to vote on the other measures, Senator?
vote on the other measures.
Item 6, AB 323 by Assemblymember Olson. The current vote is 6-0. Absent members, Gaines.
Aye.
Gaines, aye. 7-0.
Okay, that matter passed, that matter is approved 7-0. Consent.
Item 1, AB 273 by Committee on ESTM. Motion do pass to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote is 5-0. Absent members, Gaines.
Aye.
Gaines, aye. Bates. 6-0. Item
Okay,
2.
that matter is approved 6-0.
Item 2, AB 274, Committee on ESTM. Current motion is due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations.
Fran.
Current vote is 5-0. Absent members, Gaines.
Maybe 274?
Right.
274.
Aye.
Gaines, aye. Pavley.
Aye.
Pavley, aye. 7-0.
Raise the interest. There she goes again. All right, that matter is approved 7-0.
Item 3, AB 275, Committee on ESTM. Motion due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent member, Gaines.
No.
Gaines, no.
Okay, got it.
6-1.
That matter's approved.
Item 4, AB 276, Committee on ESTM. Motion due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent member Gaines.
Aye.
Gaines, aye. 7-0.
Okay, that matter's approved 7-0.
Item 5, AB 21, Assemblymember Perea, due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent members Gaines.
The bill number,
Oh, AB 21.
Senator.
Perea, you like.
Item 5.
my numbers are different than yours.
Gaines, aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Matter's
7.
approved 7-0.
Item 7, AB 434 by Eduardo Garcia, due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent member Wykowski.
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. 7-0. Item 8, AB 649, Assemblymember Patterson, due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent member Pavley.
That matter's approved 6-0.
6-0. Item 9, AB 888, Assemblymember Bloom. Motion due pass to Committee on Judiciary. The current vote is 4-1, with chair voting aye. Absent members, Gaines. Leno.
We'll keep that matter on hold, on the call. Next.
Item 10, AB 1059, Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia. Due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 5-0. Absent members
Aye.
Wykowski. Wykowski, aye. Bates.
Aye.
Bates, aye. 7-0.
That matter passes 7-0. We have, thank you, members. I will stay here and keep the roll open on, or let's call the absent members on AB 888.
Item 9, AB 888, Assemblymember Bloom, due pass to Committee on Judiciary. Current vote is 4-1, with the chair voting aye. Absent members Gaines. Leno. Aye. Leno, aye.
That matter passes 5-1. Our work here at the Senate Environmental Quality Committee is done. We are adjourned.